Esencia Pour Homme was released by Loewe in 1988, and it is classified as an aromatic fougere. It has notes that include lavender, galbanum, juniper berries, artemisia, basil, clary sage, and of course those conifers such as pine and fir. There's also some geranium, rose, neroli, jasmine, other florals, blackcurrant, and in the base there is plenty of oak moss, leather, vetiver, styrax, cedar, patchouli, and other woods and musks. Hey folks, we're going to be discussing two different formulations of Esencia from Loewe. We are going to be doing this early 2000s version and this much more recent version of Esencia from Loewe. And we have two bottles here. We have the older bottle here. We're going to take a good look at the details of this bottle versus the details of this bottle. First off, on the top, the older version has a lighter leather. Let's see. And then in the newer version, we have this darker leather. If we look at the front, we see a slight difference in the font. And in the font in the older version, we can notice that explicitly where it is printed Eau de Toilette Pour Homme, whereas in the newer version, we have a different font reading Eau de Toilette Pour Homme. But what's most important is the changes that come from the formulation and how they smell different. And let me tell you, there is a stark difference between the two of these. So here we have the earlier version on my left hand. And there's something blooming, a coniferous, herbal, aromatic bloom that's coming from my forehand here. And it's mossy, and it's green, and somewhat spicy. It's dimensional. And then we have this newer version on my right hand. Soapy, aldehydic. I do pick up isobornyl acetate and this very two-dimensional coniferous pine thing going on, but it seems skeletal in comparison. It seems like the meat, the flesh, is missing. It's pleasant, it isn't offensive, but it lacks that volume that comes from, Something was really lost between this formulation and this one here. There just seems to be so much more substantial heft to this version. This version, which I think dates to the late 90s to maybe mid 2000s at the latest, prior to some significant IFRA regulations. We did notice that there was a shorter ingredients list, which can tell us that the bottle was likely before 2003 or 2004. And here, this one could be as recent as a few years ago. It's sadly lacking the soul and the spirit of this older version. Now, some would argue that even the older version, which I have right here, not that one, is a pale shell of its former self from the 80s. However, the 80s version is really hard to obtain. And if this is a shell of its former self, then I would have my mind blown probably. I would imagine it's not terribly different from that earliest formulation, or those earliest formulations, 1988 and shortly thereafter, because this one is pretty spectacular. However, this one is a bit disappointing. Something happened along the way. This composition, this formula, was not treated well, and it's apparent when you smell it. It smells a little bit cheap, a little thin. It just lacks that backbone. I'm smelling it again on my hand, and there is not much going on. It's very much like a soapy, aldehydic, piney, synthetic herbal kind of thing. And I of course, I could discuss the oak moss aspect of it. Sure enough, the older bottle had more oak moss. And we know that that is necessary in all cases in order for a fragrance to smell substantial. But I think in this instance, the removal of the significant amount of oak moss from Esencia renders it rather hollow here. Some of the notes that I find more apparent in the older version of Esencia include the juniper berries, tarragon, the artemisia. I do notice much more of a black currant note, and overall the leather is far more robust in the dry down, along with the musk and the moss. So the verdict? Esencia by Loewe belongs in the older but better list. Sad but true, this particular fragrance was not treated kindly in its subsequent reformulations, particularly after 2003, 2004. So if I were you, hunt down the older bottle. That's where the integrity was left, and these newer bottles are pretty pale in comparison. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, hit the like button, and when subscribing, click on the bell to receive notifications of future videos. And as always, be good to each other.